BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. I have a couple announcements before we begin. The first is that to everyone who has been following the book discussion on Zodiac Killer, Just the Facts, the final episode on that series will come out on Monday for the Zodiac Monday segment, and we will be talking about the murder of Paul Stein from October 11th of 1969. So please tune in for that one if you've been following the book discussion, or if you're listening to this at a future date, there are going to be at least 4 episodes on the book Zodiac Killer, Just the Facts, which is an assembly and compilation of the police reports. However, there are a couple things like the AMA and the Zodiac Just the Facts versus Zodiac Hoax Theory that you can also hear as well. So lots of things to tune into. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's a great time, and you can follow along with all of those. Also, I have perhaps a bigger announcement. This channel will have somewhat of a hiatus during the summer months in which we are in now. Right now it's the beginning of July, but don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I will just be doing somewhat of a different project. I've actually launched a new channel that is going to be debuting videos sometime next week to anyone who's listening to these things daily. It's called AstroPsych 400, and I'll do a promotional piece for that when the videos actually start coming out. I talk a lot about the Zodiac Killer on this channel, and I started reading up on astrology, so as from the title AstroPsych 400, it's going to be more devoted to astrology and personalities, and if you are someone who is not a believer in that stuff, I think you will like that even more than someone who is a genuine believer, because I'm very skeptical of these things. So it's just talking about experiences in life and how reading this stuff on the internet, checking your daily horoscope, how all of that comes together. One more time, the name of the channel will be AstroPsych 400, and that should debut sometime next week, and it's only going to be 12 videos, one for each star sign, or one for each sign of the Zodiac, if you will. But yeah, the Zodiac Killer pushed me into a different direction. And after those 12 videos are completed, Black Box Online Radio will go back to its normal format, although there might be an additional 4th episode that's going to be coming out every week. I've debuted a couple true crime talk radio episodes, as well as the CIA talk radio one, which are general discussions, as opposed to the ones like we're going to be doing today that are going to be devoted to a single subject. They're ones that do very small amounts of time to different cases. And also, you can do things like you read an article and you respond to it, social commentary, which I think is the heart and soul of this channel. I've never pretended to be an expert on anything, really, so I've always wanted this channel to be more about, say, if you read the same book as somebody else and you were talking to somebody about that book, well, what would you say? And that's kind of what this is for people who are curious about the true crime world, someone who's following the same true crime mystery or even conspiracy theory at some points. And what do you have to say about it? So I'll say my things here on the channel, and you guys can write yours in the comments section. You can also contact me at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com if you have anything larger to send, especially you guys that like to recommend books and send documents, and we'll see how that'll even tie into today's episode. And the final announcement is I have a book coming out later this year. It is a novel, and I know some people have been asking me if I'm going to put out a book about the Zodiac Killer. Well, this one's going to be fictional. It's called Killer on a White Horse. I know that's not the best title, but It's the title that seemed to be somewhat appropriate, and while it is not about the Zodiac Killer, it was definitely inspired by some of that material. If anybody were to read the book, then you would see very clearly where the inspirations come from. You know how you have that expression, based on a true story? Well, this is more like inspired by true events, and the true events would be the Zodiac Manson connection. I don't pretend for a second that any of these characters are 100% recreations, and it's not set in California, it's set on the East Coast, it's not set in the 60s, it's set in the contemporary times, the new millennium, the current day and age. But yes, that book will come out later this year. It'll be purely electronic, but I'll make some more announcements about that once things truly get rolling. So many things going on this summer, and for now, let's get into the episode all about Tex Watson and the book Will You Die for Me? You see, this is one that was recommended by Chad, and he contacted me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and you can also follow BlackBoxOnlineRadio on Facebook. And I was talking with Chad, actually, who is a big follower of the Manson family, and he's contacted a lot of the former Manson family members in prison. And I asked him a question. Have you ever read Tex Watson's book, Will You Die for Me? The man who killed for Charles Manson tells his own story. And it's one of those as told too. Like, it's Tex Watson as told to some guy named Chaplain Ray, which I can only understand to be Tex Watson is dictating the story and somebody is like acting like somewhat of a stenographer and a note taker, writing everything down and then putting it into a full package. And Chad recommended that I get a copy of it from Tex Watson's website for Abounding Love Ministries, and then I did just that. You could do that as opposed to getting it on Amazon.com, because if you get it from Tex Watson's website, the electronic version anyway, it is for free. So big thank you to Chad for pointing me to the right place. And also, I would also like to say, as far as pointing people to other places, this show is available for free downloads at LaunchPad 1, formerly known as LaunchPad DM. There's a link to that in the description box. The best way you can support this channel is just by listening to some more content. I mean, a great way to do that is just visit the LaunchPad site, download Black Box Online Radio, take it on the go anywhere and anyhow, and yes, that will be downloading it as a pure podcast. If you want to download the video version with these images that you're looking at, you can use YouTube Premium. Another great way to support the show is by visiting the Teespring page. Remember, being weird is not a crime. So as I began reading Tex Watson's book, I first wanted to try and separate Tex Watson from Charles Manson, because the Tate-LaBianca murders are, if anything, more about Tex Watson, because he will become the largest active participant in the Tate-LaBianca murders that happened in August of 1969. Tex Watson was someone who grew up in Texas, who is often described as the all-American guy who somehow fell under very, very negative circumstances and was eventually driven to kill by Charles Manson. I think that might be the mainstream version of who Tex Watson was. But when I'm reading his book, it begins actually with the days following the murder. Then it talks about his early life in Texas. And my first response was, where did this guy go wrong? I mean, maybe he's not the all-American guy that some other commentators make him out to be. However, I began to notice that he could have done so much more than just being some type of right-hand man for Charles Manson, because he's talking about all of the traditional experiences that a lot of high schoolers have. Okay, he wants to earn more money, so he takes a job in an onion packing plant for the summers, and then he learns about auto mechanics, and he builds a pool table from scratch, and he just seemed like someone who was very good with his hands, who had a high aptitude for knowledge, and eventually he gets frustrated with working in the onion plant, so he learns that he can work for an airline to make more money, gets to wear a schnazzier uniform, and he ends up being the guy who drives the baggage cart, like those things that carry the luggage over to the airplane and then the suitcases are loaded on. He was the guy who was driving one of those. Already, that is going to become the foundation of how alternative theorists like to say that Tex Watson is going to be the key to the Tate-LaBianca murders, not only because he's the largest active participant in it, but alternative theorists like to point out that if there's any type of unknown agenda or something that's hidden in the shadows, or there's somebody who isn't telling the truth about what happened with the Tate-LaBianca murders, the murders of Sharon Tate, Wojtek Frykowski, Abigail Folger, J.C. Ring, Stephen Perrino, and Rosemary LaBianca, anyone who's not telling the truth, it's Tex Watson. Throughout this discussion, I'm going to be connecting this to some other sources, such as the book My Life with Charles Manson by Paul Watkins, the Tate-LaBianca radio program, as well as the Stones Unturned podcast, and the interviews of Ivor Davis, as well as the interviews and writings of Howard Davis, who is behind the Zodiac Manson connection. So I'm going to try and compare and contrast these sources as well as possible, because this is not going to be a traditional book discussion, or book review rather. I mean, this is just looking at some ideas that are in the book and some things that Tex Watson has shared, and trying to find out, is he telling the truth in all of these situations? Alright, so he gets that job working at the airline, and he's driving the baggage cart, and then he eventually just leaves Texas and heads out to California. And even as I was reading that, while I remember growing up in West Virginia, sitting in a West Virginia high school cafeteria just talking to people about California must be a better place and so on, a lot of us who aren't from there just have this image of the California dream. And I think Tex Watson was pretty close to living it. He moves out to California, he gets a job passing out coupons on the street, more or less, for a wig shop, and then eventually he becomes a salesman. And I was just thinking about all this, like, let alone that he enrolls in Cal State Los Angeles in a business administration program. And I'm like, okay, maybe this guy would not have gone on to become President of the United States, but maybe he would have been the best damn assistant manager your local Hertz rental car would have ever seen. I mean, he didn't have to end up being Charles Manson's lapdog or Juicehead Gorilla or whatever. He could have done something with his life, and it's really just quite puzzling for a few things that I'll say throughout the duration of this recording. And as I was reading his book, I was like, where did this guy go wrong? Well, in the very next paragraph, they shared something. He was involved in a major car accident where his leg was injured and he needed intense medical attention. And it was even to the point where lawyers were involved, and Tex Watson wasn't driving the car, but he was involved in that accident. So as he's recovering from this leg injury, he has done a lot of work for that store that I mentioned that he was working at as a salesman. They're trying to build a new store, and because Tex is very good with his hands, he's doing all these things like building the cabinets and nailing stuff together and carpentry and so on. But they owe him lots of back wages, so he tries to go on to start his own store. Him and another guy are like, hey, let's not work for these people anymore. We know the wig business, and they talk about wigs and wiglets in the book, and I don't even know what a wiglet is, but I'm guessing it's a small wig. And then they try to start a business. It turns out to be a flop. And one of the problems is they end up just spending all their time smoking marijuana and going out to the beach. And even still, though, that seems like somewhat of a not so bad experience. I mean, yeah, of course, business is going south, but it doesn't seem like the guys care too much. Now, Tex Watson does share something in this book here in the early sections, and this relates to the Church of Scientology. We already said Tex Watson had this connection to the airline, and that's important because not only did he work there, but he also met airline stewardesses, and he would try and date them, and he's making connections. With the Church of Scientology, Tex is presenting it as a very benign interaction in the book. He's like, he goes to what is described as a service that is held at someone's house. So my interpretation of that is that it's not in like a formal chapel. He's going to a service or a presentation on the Church of Scientology, but it's in like just a residential house. It's really not anything elaborate. He even talks about how he wasn't that interested in it, but he was even snoozing a little bit. But they're talking about these things like the ego and the self, and actually elements of Eastern spirituality as well. And this will be very important because Charles Manson was actually heavily influenced by Scientology. Some of the major influences on Charles Manson were, of course, the Beatles, but Scientology and even Stranger in a Strange Land. I mean, just L. Ron Hubbard in general, but science fiction also can be argued that it could have had an impact on Charles Manson in the prison system, but I want to focus more on Tex Watson for now. When people look at Tex Watson's life, they always want to point out he had prior connections to these groups than before he met Charles Manson. As we said, like, he's interacting with people, and some of them may have been involved with the drug trade. If you ever get a chance to listen to the Tate-LaBianca radio program that is hosted by Brian Davis and Tana Laufenberg, you can hear them talk so much about how they think that Tex had this type of ulterior motive. And when I was listening to the Stones Unturned podcast and all of the episodes on the Manson family, the host of that one, Thomas Henry Horn, brought up a possibility that Tex Watson was actually calling all the shots on the night of the Tate-LaBianca murders. Because let's just flash forward. Let's just jump ahead to the future. Why would they say that this guy, Tex Watson, is calling all of the shots? Because of his connections to outside groups, such as maybe there's someone involved with the Church of Scientology, and there is actually this type of underground process church that is running this cult, like the Children or something, the way that Maury Terry theorized, and Tex Watson could have served as a link in that. I am not convinced of that at all, by the way. But then there's also this idea that it was about drugs, the very famous, it was a drug deal gone wrong. I was listening to an interview with Ivor Davis last year. I almost said an interview with Ivor Davis. No, an interview with the writer Ivor Davis, who has been following the Manson family for more than 50 years. And just to give a little bit of an introduction about him, on the Tate-LaBianca radio program, they talked about how Ivor Davis was probably around 20 or 21, 22 years old when the crimes took place. And then he went out to the Spawn Ranch and interviewed a bunch of people and put all of his interview notes into writings, and was based on the testimony of other people from the Manson family. And it may not have been completely accurate because, as we're going to see, people do not always tell the truth, or some people may just have their brains so fried by drugs and such that they're just saying weird stuff, or even better yet, as we'll discuss later on, some people are just not very credible. I mean, they don't even have good reasons for not telling the truth. They're just making crap up for God only knows why they would want to do that, but that's what they're doing. So Tex Watson is firstly, the next part would be he goes on to meet the drummer for the Beach Boys, Dennis Wilson. He's getting into his house. He's seeing all of these luxurious things. He's spending a lot of time with Dean Morehouse, who is viewed as somewhat of a spiritual advisor to Dennis Wilson, and this is at the time when he meets Charles Manson. So Dean Morehouse is definitely not the official spiritual advisor, but he talks a lot as well about breaking the ego, breaking the self, looking at how Eastern spirituality, Dharmic spirituality, would talk about how there is only one us. And I read this once on just a little scrap of paper that word namaste actually means that I honor the place in you where the entire universe resides. I honor the place in you of love, of life, and hope. If I am in that place in you and you are in that place in me, then together there is only one us. It's something more to the effect of infinite consciousness. If love is all there is, there can be no opposite. Okay, so this guy, Dean Morehouse, is talking about a lot of those things, but Dennis Wilson is the drummer for the Beach Boys, and he's going on tour a lot, and Charles Manson is just like playing his guitar and interacting with actually a lot of people in Beverly Hills. This is one of the points that Tex Watson does draw attention to in the book. It's not only Dennis Wilson, not only the Beach Boys. Charles Manson is going around to parties and such, and he is interacting with numerous people from the quote-unquote cultural and California elite circles. And also this brings about the women in the group, particularly the ones he talks about: Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, as well as Lynette Squeaky Fromme, and countless other people. Ruth Ann Morehouse, who is the daughter of Dean Morehouse, one of the younger members of the Manson family. Lots of them are mentioned. Well, of course they're going to be mentioned, but he's giving the stories of how he gets to know them, and he actually starts out by not being a true member of the family. Tex Watson goes on to be living in a tent near the Spawn Ranch, but it's just kind of off to the side in this muddy little area, and then he can come up every once in a while. But he talks about this in the book when he's going back to the tent, and he's just hearing laughter and songs from the quote unquote Manson family, and he's just kind of left alone, just in the stillness with his own thoughts and so on. So you can see that the California dream, well, it's just that it's a dream, and then what happens after a dream? You wake up, and then you're left with the bitter case of reality. Firstly, he had that issue that I was talking about when I said that he tried to start the business and it didn't work out, and of course by now he has dropped out of Cal State Los Angeles, dropped out of that business administration program. But when he is at the Spawn Ranch, because he's very good at building things and working with his hands and working on cars, he starts fixing trucks for George Spawn. They got all these old clunkers there, and he does repair work on them. Some of them are unsalvageable, but he is very useful. And Charles Manson takes note of that, and slowly he begins to become integrated into the Manson family. And one thing, though, that is not mentioned in the early parts of the book is Tex's musical ability, but Charles Manson said very clearly that everybody in the Manson family was part of the musical act, and that's why it's called the family. That's why we refer to them as that, because the name of their musical act was the Family Jams. And there are a few sentences in the book where Tex Watson talks about loading our instruments to a musical gig and so on, including even things like the tambourines. But at this time, though, let's also look at a time that's maybe a year after Tex Watson is involved, or well into Tex Watson's tenure with the family. There's someone who comes to the ranch named Linda Kasabian. Linda Kasabian will go on to become a very polarizing figure in the Manson family world, because on the night of the Sharon Tate murders, as we said, Sharon Tate and her friends, of course, Linda Kasabian is originally said to be the lookout. In the official narrative, Linda Kasabian is said to have been the lookout, but on the Tate-LaBianca radio program, they do put forward the possibility that Linda Kasabian and Tex Watson may have had a relationship going on, and there was perhaps some plan that they were the ones who were going to break free. They were the ones who were going to run off together, and they were going to steal some of the money that was meant to be for the family or was meant to be for Charlie. That's just guesswork at this point. I mean, there are numerous episodes of the Tate-LaBianca radio program that you can hear on YouTube for free, and they discuss the different angles of the theory, and sometimes it's very contradictory, especially if you listen to one, say, from 2021, and then you go back and listen to one from 2019. Like, hey, wait a second, 2 years before you're saying something completely different. But I know exactly what that's like, because I perhaps have done that many times talking about some other true crime cases. You're trying to explore the different sides of the issue to see what makes sense, or perhaps can you catch somebody in a lie. But the things that they're trying to point out with Linda Kasabian is she is a member of the Manson family who, because of her very, very minimal role, allegedly, in the Tate-LaBianca murders, she would go on to testify for the prosecution, and almost admonishing her of all guilt, if I'm using that word correctly. She is someone who's going to be protected, getting immunity. I mean, I think that's more what I wanted to say. So they think that Linda Kasabian might just be a cruel backstabber, and she was actually a very active participant in this. Because before you have the Tate-LaBianca murders, there is the murder of Gary Hinman. Gary Hinman was a music teacher. He was also someone who was somewhat of a drug dealer, and he was requested to procure a batch of mescaline for a motorcycle gang called the Straight Satans. I mean, it's going to be going to the Manson family and then to the Straight Satans. But then, apparently, it turns out to be a bad batch, or perhaps Gary Hinman messed up the procurement process, and it was bad mescaline, so then they want their money back, and this turns into a dispute. And this is the famous incident where Charles Manson goes to Gary Hinman and strikes him in the ear with a Confederate sword, And I heard this like in the interview, and maybe you've even heard this clip when the interviewer's asking Charles Manson, like, "Did you murder Sharon Tate?" And he says, "Hell no." And they're like, "Did you cut off Gary Hinman's ear?" "Hell, yes, I did." So he was very open about that, and I think instead of actually cutting off his ears, that he struck him in the side of the head with a Confederate sword, and I mean his ear was very badly damaged, but then of course Gary Hinman is going to go on to be murdered, and allegedly by that time Charles Manson is already gone, as well as Bruce Davis already leaving the scene of the crime, so they have this murder that has taken place of Gary Hinman. Who stayed behind? Somebody named Bobby Beausoleil. Bobby Beausoleil then takes Gary Hinman's car, and he's driving a dead man's car. He gets caught very easily, and he gets put in jail. So then one of the Manson family members, who is a very close ally of Charles Manson, is in jail. But the things that Brian Davis likes to theorize about is, okay, no matter how close this guy is to Charles Manson, no matter how loyal he is it possible at all that they were still very worried that Bobby Beausoleil was going to talk, that he would blame the murder on other people like Charles Manson, like Bruce Davis, like Susan Atkins, like Mary Bruner, other members of the family. So he was going to more or less cut a deal and put the blame on them, and they're all going to be arrested, and then I think you can get the idea. So they're very much afraid about that, but so far they don't have any indicators of that other than a phone call that Bobby Beausoleil makes from prison calling the ranch. And the other point to say in favor of that is that the thing that they theorize on the Tate-LaBianca radio program is that, was it Linda Kasabian who came up with the idea of a copycat murder? And what exactly would that be? Well, that would mean going to a place like the house on Cielo Drive that they were very familiar with, that Terry Melcher was, who used to live at, and that they were just going to go there, kill everybody in the house, and then they're going to go to the LaBianca house next, because there could be one possibility for this, and they zone in once again on Linda Kasabian, that she could have been outside, and then she talks to Charles Manson and says that she wants drugs, and they're like, well, we don't know anyone who has drugs. What about that house where you went to that party last year? Like, I'm going to show you. They drive to the LaBianca house, and they see that there is just a boat in the driveway or a boat on the street. I mean, like, in one of those boat trailers, and they're like, hey, wait a second. Okay, it's not the people who live there anymore, but that's something that I didn't recognize. And then they begin to think about, let's rob these people to either get money or to get drugs, and also this all serves the purpose of creating these copycat murders, because there is so much more time that happens after the Tate-LaBianca murders. And even if you don't think that my theorizing, or it's not my theorizing, this is my interpretation of other people's comments, is correct, or maybe I missed a step or two, here's something that I don't think I'm missing any steps on. The beginning of Charles Tex Watson's book talks about all of the time after the Tate-LaBianca murders, and he's roaming the desert, he is hitchhiking, and eventually he'll go back to his home in Texas. And I mean, he calls his mother, and either she or someone else in the family sends him money via Western Union. He gets a helicopter from San Bernardino County to LAX, and then gets a plane to Texas. He arrives at 5 a.m. in the morning, and he's already had like a shower and a shave, and so with some of the money that he got from Western Union, he buys a Big Mac, and then he says, oh my gosh, it was so weird eating meat after a month of just, kind of roaming around. He almost threw up. But then, even once he gets back in Texas, his sister picks him up at the airport at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's like, your hair's still too long, so they got to take him to a barber shop first, and once it opens, of course. But all of that, I was just reading those introductory paragraphs, and I was like, Tex Watson could have gotten away with this. I mean, numerous people in the Manson family could have gotten away with this. Maybe Charles Manson could have gotten away with this. It's just the fact that they were a family. And I think that's one of the reasons why people really question what was the motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders, and that's become the real mystery in itself. With things like the Zodiac killer, we don't know who committed the crimes. I mean, lots of people have their theories. Or, I mean, with Jack the Ripper, same thing. We don't know who committed the crimes, only theories. With the Tate-LaBianca murders, as well as the murder of Gary Hinman and the murder of Shorty Shea, the Manson family killings, and perhaps a host of other crimes that have been attributed to the Manson family, we know who committed the crimes. It's just, why did they do this? And there's also this idea that Charles Manson wanted to start a race war, that Manson is somewhat out of his mind, and he's talking about Helter Skelter, the race war. He wants to anticipate how there's going to be this type of race war, and they're going to go out to the desert, and they're going to live in a bottomless pit, and they're going to have machine guns on their dune buggies, and they're going to grow their numbers to 144,000, and then the blacks are going to defeat the whites in the race war, and then Charles Manson's going to become the leader of the blacks because he'll show them how to do it. Because a lot of people think that Charles Manson really is a very insightful individual, and maybe you've even heard interviews with him when he talks about prison doesn't begin or end at the gate. Prison is in the mind. Like, he has a lot of things that really catch your attention, but what I did hear from Brian Davis is that Charles Manson was diagnosed as a schizophrenic in 1963, well before the Tate-LaBianca murders took place, well before the family was even a thing. So, I mean, a lot of that is Manson's schizophrenia, and I think one of the best examples of that is Charles Manson's epic question, do you feel the blame? Are you mad? Do you ever feel like Franich? And they even point out how he just breaks out into gibberish from time to time. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo, I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. Although that one's pretty good actually. So the whole point is that Manson is very mentally unstable, and at this point, I was forced to recollect something that I thought about when I was reading Paul Watkins's book, My Life with Charles Manson, and it was all about how if Manson didn't believe this race war stuff and the bottomless pit and the numbers to 144,000 and the dune buggies in the desert with machine guns, then he definitely talked about it. He may not have believed it, but he definitely talked about it. And Tex Watson even mentions that here in this book when there's just that question posed. I'm sure at some point someone will ask me, did Charles Manson actually believe that there was a bottomless pit in the desert? Or maybe Tex phrases it like, did I actually think there was a bottomless pit in the desert? And what he says is very clearly that at at that point, he was just so pulled into Charles Manson, it seemed like it made sense at the time. But I noticed a different type of observation from reading the book My Life with Charles Manson by Paul Watkins, and that is that it's almost like an anchor point, where there is an anchor point in that story, because some of those things are even biblical in proportion. I've, since learned that, I mean, after looking into Charles Manson, that 144,000 comes from the book of Revelations, and it's about the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's actually a biblical reference. And then you have the bottomless pit in the desert, but the anchor point is the dune buggies with machine guns. Like, Manson is talking about all of these things that are just larger than life, but then he gives the people in his family something that they can understand because they have dune buggies, they know about the desert. Okay, we're going to have our dune buggies and we're going to put machine guns on them. Alright, so that is something that they can visualize. It's like this anchor point of familiarity. But that's just my 2 cents on the subject. Now, was this actually a drug deal gone wrong that led to the Tate-LaBianca murders? It definitely seems like a drug deal gone wrong that led to the murder of Gary Hinman. And was Linda Kasabian the person who said, hey, let's commit a spree of copycat murders? And that's why Sharon Tate was murdered, as well as her unborn child and all her friends, and Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. Is that really what happened? Well, the alternative is the mainstream explanation of how there was Charles Manson, who wanted a record deal from Terry Melcher, who was the son of Doris Day, but he lived in the house on Cielo Drive, 10050, maybe 150, No, I can't say that. We gotta keep saying 1000. Fudge, 10050. I had that down so perfectly. I was like, that had such a great ring to it. 10050 Cielo Drive. The house that used to be inhabited by Terry Melcher, who was the producer who was allegedly supposed to give Charles Manson this record deal, or they have their quote-unquote contract, right? So when you hear the stories of Charles Manson and his behavior, he thought that he was going to get this record deal, and it didn't happen. And I even said very clearly in a different episode here on Black Box Online Radio that one of the reasons why I kept talking about the Manson family so much last year was when I was back in elementary school, I had a teacher who said, there's this guy, Charles Manson, and he committed a series of murders because he didn't get the record deal that he wanted. He really wanted to be a famous musician and a rock star and so on. And of course, Manson wasn't behind the Tate-LaBianca murders physically. It was mostly Tex Watson, and perhaps one of the commonalities is Susan Atkins is an active participant in that, holding down Sharon Tate, and that Leslie Van Houten definitely participated in the stabbing at the LaBiancas, although Leslie Van Houten insists that she stabbed Rosemary LaBianca post-mortem. However, to talk about the motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders, I would like to play an audio clip from the documentary Cease to Exist, which was put out in 2007, because I think that this was a very clear example of Charles Manson openly talking about the motive. And here we go.
Bringing a little box here along so that you could hear.
Let me explain. Tate-LaBianca was killed for a black phone book with all the numbers in it. The phone numbers that controlled the music market. Sharon Tate and those people were killed because Terry Melcher broke a contract and sent 3 Orientals with hatchets over to kill somebody else. In other words, you raise men up in the music, and everybody wants to say, hey, well, mine is better than his. And what are you doing up on my stage? And who controls what on this set? When you see Sharon Tate's body laying there all naked, murdered, dead, do you think I had something to do with that? That was the altar. It had nothing to do with me.
Oh, wait, Charlie, I can't let you get away with that shit. Terry Melcher was supposed to do some things with music he didn't do. So? Terry Melcher lived in that house. So? Nobody knew Sharon Tate lived in that house. So killing Terry Melcher was okay? No. He broke his word, man. So you went looking for him? I didn't go looking for anyone. No. See, there again, you don't understand it. Let me lace it up your head again, man.
Because when I fell out of this penitentiary and I was playing my music, you, Neil Diamond, Buffalo Springfield, Beach Boys, all them guys came to me, you dig, and you said, how can you play this kind of music, man? We've never heard this kind of music before. You know, he said, wow, this is strange kind of music, you know? And I said, oh. And they copied and stole from me and took it down and put it in whatever they did, you dig?
We were in and out of the best music studio.
Okay, and that is the end of Charles Manson talking there. And if you'd like to hear the full documentary, it is Cease to Exist. This one that I was just playing the clip from is on Ryan Oxenberg's channel, Oksenberg, Oxenberg. And I believe when I watched this one last year, though, it was divided up into 10 different parts, but that's also on the same channel, Ryan Oxenberg. And I watched it, you just have to change videos every 10 minutes, part 1, part 2, part 3, and so on, but the full version is now available. I think that's one of the clearer times when they've actually had 3 solid audio clips of Charles Manson detailing the motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders, and that is the conventional one. If I had to subscribe to one, it would be that one there. But did you hear that part about the issue with Terry Melcher sending the Orientals and they got the hatchets or whatever? Did you hear that? Well, from reading up on the case, there's a story that is also mentioned in Tex Watson's book, that a mobile recording studio was sent to the Spawn Ranch where Charles Manson lived, and he's supposed to record his music. And then some of the guys there are at least 3 guys whom Charles Manson describes as blonde-haired, blue-eyed Orientals. I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what that means. Forgive my language, even. But then they all started doing drugs, and one of them tripped out hard and was thinking that Charles Manson was the devil, and he tried to murder him, and that guy had to be subdued. Bruce Davison, another member of the Manson family, just had to subdue this guy because he's trying to go after Charles Manson. I thought it was just a piece of farm equipment, or maybe even like a handheld thing, like a pitchfork. But I think Charles Manson said it was a hatchet. He's coming after him. Terry Melcher sent these guys, and they are trying to kill him. Granted, they were high on drugs, or at least one of them was. And this was also perhaps another trigger for the Tate-LaBianca murders, but some people think that Charles Manson is a total liar. Some people think Tex Watson is a total liar. Now, in his book, him referring to Tex Watson, when he talks about that story, all he says is, there was a mobile recording studio that's going to the Spawn Ranch, and one of the guys tripped out on LSD really badly, and that's all. That's just the end of it. There's nothing about trying to kill Charles Manson. There's nothing about swinging hatchets or pitchforks. That's all. So I really began to think that perhaps Tex Watson is downplaying the subject, but when they talk about this whole thing about who's in control, some point that I think everybody is on agreement with is Tex Watson is physically superior to Charles Manson in every sense of the word. He could have eviscerated Charles Manson in a fistfight, yet in Tex Watson's book he's talking so clearly about how he just feels like he's under Charlie's spell, and he is also unable to get him back to his senses, and that he also has an epiphany moment prior to the Tate-LaBianca murders, mind you, when he's like, wait a second, I'm doing all these things for Charlie. I'm like, is this all supposed to be in the name of love? Wait, what is love even? Like, he's just like, kind of gets back to his senses for a minute, but then ends up going along with Charles Manson as well. And I do think that Charles Manson is meeting absolutely every definition of being a cult leader, because I've talked a lot about cult leader psychology on this channel, and there are three major points that we discuss here, and that first is, a cult leader will try and reject all of the ways of the past, and then they will create a new way, usually in the form of a book. But with Charles Manson, it almost seems like it's just in the form of his quips and sayings and ramblings. But they create this new way, and then they tell you that there is something missing from your life, and the only way to get it is by following this new way that they've created. Charles Manson did all of those things, absolutely all of them. For example, telling all the members of the family that they are not loved, that the only way through love is through listening to Charles Manson and his music and all of that happy crap. But as far as being aware of his senses, Tex Watson wrote a very interesting line in the book when he talks about going to that house, 10050 Cielo Drive, and he says, it was the first time I went to the house, but it would not be the last. And when I was reading that, just this cold chill came over me when he's like almost romanticizing it or just making light of it. I know that he's telling a story, but it's just kind of like, oh, well, whoopsie daisy. It just seemed like he was being so lighthearted about being involved with the murders of Sharon Tate and all of her friends, as well as Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. So that just really made me feel, and maybe I'm completely going the wrong direction. Maybe my emotions have guided me to a wrong push, but sometimes you go with your gut instinct and you're like, it seems like perhaps he was in a lot more control than what he's actually saying in the book, that he's just under Charlie's spell, because this is why people have problems with the Manson family. It's always, it was Charlie, or it was the drugs, or I was lost. They never just simply say, I was wrong. It's always, well, someone pushed me down a pathway where I shouldn't have been. No, I was wrong, I was weak, I made horrible mistakes, and I'm there to repent. Instead, there's always just try to blame it on somebody else, or blame it even on other things like drugs. And I've noticed that not only with Tex Watson, you'll definitely hear that if you ever watch any interviews with him, particularly the 700 Club. but also listening to Leslie Van Houten, and on TLB radio they called her Susan Claptrap Atkins. That's such a better name than Sadie Mae Glutz. In fact, both of those are disgusting. I don't know what anyone ever saw in Susan Atkins, this whole sexy Sadie image. I just can't comprehend it. But she seems like a very, very despicable individual. But also, Susan Atkins is from a troubled background. She was from a troubled background. That is no excuse for murder, but that is why it's happening, and she definitely must have had some type of horrible relationship with her father. She seems like an absolute Freudian mess. But then, once you get to Tex Watson and his agenda, people seem to think that through Tex's interactions with other people, he could have been heavily involved with the drug trade. And who else would have been involved with the drug trade? Wojtek Frykowski and Jay Sebring. I mean, these guys are all dead, rest in peace to them. They didn't deserve to get murdered like that no matter what. But some of the possibilities that are on the table is, let's say, hypothetically, Linda Kasabian or somebody else in the Manson family said, we're going to commit the string of copycat murders. If Gary Hinman was killed because of a drug deal that was gone wrong, what are they going to do? They're going to murder a drug dealer to create the copycat murder, and maybe even just murder the drug dealers and take the money and give it to Charlie, because they know that the drug dealers are going to have the money, and maybe by this point they know that Terry Melcher isn't in the house. Charles Manson knew that Terry Melcher wasn't in 10050 Cielo Drive, and that going after some people like Wojtek Frykowski, maybe Jay Sebring, I mean, if they're somewhat connected to the social elites, they might have had knowledge of that. Although Tex Watson does say in his book that by the time the murders took place, Charles Manson was not very well connected to the Beverly Hills scene. He stopped getting invites to parties, and I don't know, though, when you listen to that audio clip of him just talking about how Terry Melcher broke a contract, and the thing about Cease to Exist, the reason why that's involved is apparently one of the songs that Manson had created was repackaged, and the lyrics were changed from Cease to Exist to Cease to Resist, and he was also very upset about that. But I believe the Beach Boys did pay Charles Manson once for a song, giving him $5,000, which many people thought was a very high and substantial payment. And I know I'm jumping around all over the map, but as I said, not a traditional book review where you just give a little bit of a summary and you say, I like this and I didn't like that. No, let's talk about the content. No, the other theories for the motives for the Tate-LaBianca murders, if you don't accept the conventional one, which you heard in your own words from Charlie Manson, or you don't accept the drug deal gone wrong, then what's the other one? That it was a prostitution deal gone wrong, because Charles Manson has access to all these women who are doing things that he asked them to do. Prostitution, that there was someone was supposed to either be a pimp, or how about pornography? That it was a pornographic deal gone wrong, because Roman Polanski did film Private Pornography, the husband of Sharon Tate. One of his private pornographic films was discovered after the Tate-LaBianca murders. They found the camcorder that had the videotape in it of Sharon Tate being raped by two men or forced to have sex against her will. I mean, I say that because it isn't completely certain whether or not she was an active participant in it when it's being filmed by Roman Polanski with his voice in the background. I mean, was it just some type of rough porno, or was it real? I don't think we'll ever know without Sharon Tate there here to defend herself. But there could be numerous reasons why they went to the house that night, but the most conventional one seems to be that Charles Manson wanted revenge on the cultural and media elites of California. And you heard the line about Lino LaBianca was in possession of a phone book that had the numbers of people from the music industry in it, and they wanted to go after other people in the music industry, meaning that perhaps there is something beneficial about creating the race war. Maybe you'll get Bobby Beausoleil out of prison, but also, and if Bobby Beausoleil is out of prison, then he can't rat anybody out. So that's the two birds with one stone thing. But in conclusion, I would just like to recommend the sources again that I've been using. I've got the free copy of the book Will You Die For Me, as well as My Life with Charles Manson. I got that one on YouTube for free. There was an audio reading that was put out, and I think there were 25 different episodes, like 25 different chapters of an audiobook, My Life with Charles Manson by Paul Watkins, who is the more showboating person who calls himself Charles Manson's right-hand man. Charles Manson had at least 3 right-hand men in his tenure, and those were Tex Watson, Paul Watkins, and Bruce Davis, of course. And then you would, I've also recommended the Tate-LaBianca radio program a lot, the Stones Unturned podcast, and we didn't talk too much about the comments that have been made by Howard Davis, but I did want to share that because I've been listening to interviews with him. He appeared on the Tate-LaBianca radio program as well as Planet X Filmworks. So you can see that Charles Manson was some guy that came from a troubled background, and he was someone who spent only 13 years of his life outside of either prison or the reform schools. But even still, that's not a motive. That's not a good reason to have anybody murdered. What do you think about the Tate-LaBianca murders, and what do you think about some guy like Tex Watson? Is he truthful, or does the fact that he seems to downplay events in his book suggest that perhaps he is hiding things? Or do you think that he doesn't actually have any remorse for the killings, and that he's, in all reality, he's somewhat lighthearted, indifferent, and apathetic about them? I would love to read your responses in the comments section below. One more time, you can download the show for free online at LaunchPad, DM, Black Box Online Radio. A link to that is in the description box. You can also follow the show on Facebook, Black Box Online Radio, and my personal Facebook is in the description box. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And please feel free to visit the Teespring page. Remember, being weird is not a crime. You can also see that Black Box Online Radio shirt that comes in almost all sizes and colors. Once again, available at Teespring. And I will see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And before I say until next time, don't forget to tune in to the Monday episode when we talk about the murder of Paul Stein and the conclusion of the book discussion, Zodiac Killer, Just the Facts. Okay. See you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And now, until next time.